Welcome to the latest webinar in our JET Alumni Chapter Leader Webinar Series. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes to see if other people will go ahead and join the webinar. If you can go ahead and type in the box if you can hear me, that would be great. Okay, so it looks like people can hear me, so that's great. We're just going to give it another minute to see if any other people will be joining. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to the webinar. We have monthly webinars. My name is Casey Neely, and I'm the Program Coordinator of USJETAA. I will be moderating the webinar today. First, I'd like to welcome today's speakers, Brenda McKinney, Dustin Henrich, and Bahia Simone Lane. Thank you for joining us. But before we begin with introductions, I'd like to give a brief introduction to USJETAA, the United States-Japan Exchange and Teaching Program Alumni Association. It is a nonprofit organization that furthers the U.S.-Japan relationship by supporting alumni of the JET program. We provide resources for individual JET alumni, JETAA chapters nationwide, and potential JET participants. We provide the leadership of the 19 U.S. JETAA chapters with support in programming, membership recruitment, chapter management, leadership, professional development, and fundraising. If you are a JET program alumni and you aren't already a member, we strongly encourage you to join for free at usjetaa.org. Also, if you are a chapter who hasn't signed up with us, we encourage you to do so. If you enjoy this webinar and any of our other programming, please consider donating to USJETAA. We currently run 4 annual programs. The first is our partnership with Osaka, USA to provide grant funding to JETAA chapters and sub-chapters to hold events in their local communities on U.S.-Japan relations. Bahia will be talking further about this grant. So if you have any questions, I would encourage you to ask her at the end of the webinar. We also facilitate a leadership program funded by the Japan Foundation CGP and Claire, where representatives from USJETAA visit JETAA chapters and sub-chapters to hold tailored workshops focused on leadership and growth. Applications for this program are accepted on a rolling basis. So if you have an interest in a leadership event, we definitely encourage you to contact us. Our third program is the webinar series. We hold 2 different series, one for JETAA chapter leaders and the other for individual JET alumni. So thank you for being a part of this one. Our 4th program is the Microgrant Initiative with the U.S. Embassy Tokyo, which funds current American JETs for projects in their schools and communities. The application deadline for this program has already passed, but typically it opens again in the fall, so definitely check back on our social media and our website. The last program is a partnership between USJETAA and East-West Center that we started this year. It's a call for JET alumni to be authors and write articles for the East-West Center website, Asia Matters for America. Our deadline for our second submission has already passed, but we hope to continue this program in the future. So please definitely check back on our website and social media for any updates if you are interested. Today's webinar will provide information on how JET alumni chapters or just anyone can organize key marquee events. First, we'll have Bahia, who is the Executive Director of USJETAA, giving general tips and tricks about how to put together a great event, talking about our partnership and grant program with Osaka, USA, and one way that chapters can fund these events. Next, we'll have Brenda and Dustin talking about 2 case studies of events they have held in the past. Before I turn it over to them to give their introductions, I'd like to let listeners know that we are recording the webinar and we'll post it on our website for those who can attend, or if you aren't able to attend all of it because you have something else to do. Please hold your questions until the end, or you can type them in the chat feature at any time, and we'll go ahead and answer them at the end. During the Q&A, you can also use the raise hand function if you would like to use your microphone to ask a question in person. So those are two different options. Now I'll go ahead and turn it over to them so they can do their brief introduction.
I can't, oh, I'm unmuted. Hi, so this is Brenda McKinney, and it's great to be on saying hello from New York City to everyone. I was an ALT in Hyogo Prefecture, working in a public high school for 3 years. And during my time on JET, I was active in Hyogo AJET. And then my last year, I also got involved with National AJET. So I don't know, I think there might be some similarity with others on the webinar. And I'm excited to hear your questions and engage with all of you. But AJET was a great opportunity to get involved with planning events in the community. So when I came back from JET, it was actually the first community I had. I moved to Boston, was with JETAA New England in Boston. And it was kind of a seamless transition going from National AJET to JETAA Boston. I didn't know anyone when I moved to the city, and so kind of found my first group of friends and my first sort of family after JET through JETAA. So I've been active with JETAA since I came back in 2009, which is crazy, 10 years ago. And since then, my husband, who's also an alum, and I have lived in a number of places. So we're in Boston and Chicago and DC and New Zealand, and then DC and New York. But one thread through all of that has really been JETAA. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about one specific event in New York, but more about my experiences with this organization broadly. Yeah, and then most recently, I have been working with JETAANY. I served as JETAANY's president, and it's just a privilege and honor to be here today. So thank you, and look forward to talking more about JETs at the Met.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm on my phone.
You sound great, Dustin.
Yeah.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dustin, and I was an ALT in Osaka Prefecture from 2012 to 2014. And then shortly after I came back to Kansas City, Missouri, I was the web designer for Heartland JETAA for a year. And then our former president went back on JET, and so we had to find a new president. So I decided to try to fill in his shoes, and I've been president ever since. And then this year, I decided to step it up a notch and learn from Monica and Faye and become a CR. And so this is my first year as CR, and I'm happy to be here to tell you about what we do in the Heartland.
Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Bahia.
Yes, hi. So I'm Bahia Simons Lane. I think most of you know me already. I'm the executive director of USJETAA, and I do apologize. I have a bit of a cold, so I hope you can all hear me okay. I was an ALT from 2005 to 2007 in Gunma Prefecture at an all-girls public academic high school. I was active with Gunma AJET for 1 year as the Tone region rep and also as the newsletter editor. And then when I moved to Florida a few years after JET, I became active with Florida JETAA, and I was the newsletter editor and then president of Florida JETAA. I actually was president of Florida JETAA for 5.5 years, which was quite a while. And through that, it was just really a great experience getting to know JETs from all over and the other JETAA chapter leaders. And now I'm very excited that I get to do this kind of work as my job. So today I'm going to talk very briefly and in kind of broad strokes about the basics of event planning and then about funding events. So the things that I think are the most important when you start thinking about planning an event, especially a large event, is to think about and consider the purpose or goal of your event. What do you want to get out of the event? What is the the point of the event? Is it to teach about Japanese culture? Is it to engage Jets who are, you know, maybe a little bit older and have children and don't come out to events as often? Is it to, you know, what is the purpose and meaning of the event that you're planning? And then I think it's also very important to get your team on board. A lot of times somebody has a really great idea, but you can't do it alone. It's great to involve the other JETAA chapter leaders, or even if the chapter leaders, the other elected officers can't help, look to your membership to get people on board with helping out with an event. Of course, you have to decide whether you need funding, and if you need funding, how you can get funding. So for smaller events, maybe you don't need any funding. Maybe you can just say, hey, everybody, we're gonna have a picnic at such and such a site on such and such a date. You don't need any funding for that. But depending on the event, you may need a little extra money, and there's a number of different ways that you can get funding, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And then I think it's also really important to make sure you're promoting and documenting and sharing about your event, because if people don't know about your event, they can't come to it. And if people don't know that you've had a great event, then they don't know about it. So I think it's always great to make sure you're taking pictures and sharing on social media or your email lists about what you're doing. Okay, so in terms of funding, there's a number of different ways that you can get funding. As a all the chapters receive GIA funding from Claire. I'm not really going to talk about that, but you do have the opportunity to allocate that Claire funding to specific events. We'll remind you at the end, but if you haven't seen, Claire is actually doing a webinar for treasurers next Monday night. And so I encourage you to check that out. So one of the main, other than using the Claire GIA funding, you can also charge for events. You have a ticketed event and use the cost of the tickets to help fund your event. And then the third way is using grant funding. I'm sure there's other ways that I'm not talking about, but these are some of the main ones. So using grant funding. So when you're seeking out a grant for grant funding, whether it's you know, from us or from another organization, you'll want to make sure, first of all, that you meet the requirements of that funding. So what is the criteria of the particular grant? And then what is the purpose of the grant? And does your event or activity align with that purpose of the grant? The third thing you want to do is make sure you're meeting your grantor's expectations. So when you are applying for a grant and then receiving a grant, you enter into an agreement with your grantor, and there are certain expectations that the grantor will have. So whether that's that you have to acknowledge them in your promotional materials. That's just good practice, but usually that's a requirement as part of the grant agreement. You'll usually have to make sure that what you said you're going to do in the application is what you actually do. So if you said that your event or activity is going to be about a certain thing that aligns with that particular grant, make sure it aligns. Now, the one caveat is that generally, if you're seeking grant funding, only 501c3 organizations can apply and receive that funding. However, that is not the case for the chapter grant program that is generously funded by the Osaka Peace Foundation USA. So this is my last slide. I'm just going to briefly, I want to plug this. It's a really great opportunity. The goal of this grant is to enable chapters to do more, to do events that maybe you don't have the capacity or funding to do, and to make them high caliber events related to US-Japan relations. And by high caliber, I don't necessarily mean large. I just mean bringing something meaningful to your community. You don't have to have 501c3 status. And if you're thinking about applying, I really encourage you to reach out to me I can chat with you about ideas. I'm happy to review your application and help you out with that. So the first application deadline, we're now open. We're now accepting applications. The first application deadline is July 1st. We do have a second application deadline for October 31st. However, I strongly encourage you, if you have an idea and something you'd like to do, to reach out to us now and apply during the first deadline, because there's no guarantee how much funding we will have left in the second round. So yeah, so anyway, this is a fantastic program. The event that Brenda is going to talk about was partially funded by it. We had 4 great programs last year, and you can read about them on our website. I'm not going to go into them in detail, but definitely think about this opportunity, and I hope you will take advantage of the grant. All right, let's see.
All right. So
Thank you, Bahia. That was, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Bahia. That was a great overview on the grant and like ways that you can fund your chapter. Now, Brenda, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was really helpful. And as Bahia mentioned, JETAANY has been, or JETAA New York, has been a recipient of the Osaka USA USJETAA grants for a couple of years. And it's really enabled us to put on some programming that is sort of wish list items. So one of the events that we did this past year, actually this year in January, but past fiscal year, is what I'm going to talk about today. But when you look at that structure, the things Bahia was talking about, the event basics and sort of knowing your purpose, there's a strong connection between sort of a clear grant application plan and a successful event. So just up front, I want to flag this ties to grant funding, this example, but I'm going to try to tie it into a structure and just break this down a little bit more about how we approached doing sort of what we considered a really big event for our chapter, and then how you might be able to apply this to anything. So the first event, the Marquee event, is Jets at the Met. So the Met is the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's the largest art museum in the U.S. If you haven't been, come visit us in New York. We're happy to show you. They've got a great Japanese art collection. And whenever you think of events, it's sort of like a recipe. So that's how I'm approaching this. But you also need to know or be able to answer sort of the basic questions and the W's. So who, what, where, when, why, and then also how. If you can't answer those, your funder, your granting organization might not know, but it also provides clarity and structure and really a roadmap for preparing for the event and running the event. And you're just kind of putting a system into place to make it go smoothly. So for Jets at the Met, we didn't know all of this up front, but just to give you an overview of the event, and I'll give you some visuals of it too. So who? JETAANY, so JETAA New York. We are a 501c3. We have about 2,000 members, which is over a number of states in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. We had an event for 70 alumni and friends of JET, but it was mostly alumni. And this was an event celebrating art and culture to basically explore the importance of art to the U.S.-Japan relationship. So we hosted it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan, and it was hosted on a Saturday in January. So I'll go into the why of January and the Saturday and maybe even the Met, but it was really about taking advantage of New York City. So we did brainstorm exercises as a chapter both this year and last year for our Sasakawa USJETAA applications. And one of the things, this was something that had come up a few times. We did a gala the year before because of the 30th anniversary. But New York City has it's a wealth of cultural organizations. And we thought, this isn't something that's really available to the public, or that it's something we would like to do, but we can't necessarily plan it without support. Excuse the cough. I'm like, but yeah, I've got a cold. But so we want to take advantage of New York and sort of highlight New York, offer something new, highlight another aspect of U.S.-Japan relations, and then also highlight and strengthen those relationships. So we really wanted to also elevate our capacity as a chapter to bring some experts together and look at a dynamic part of the U.S.-Japan relationship, maybe what art means to it, but more how art strengthens it. So how it creates connections to Japan and is an expression of those connections. And the way we were able to make that happen is through the Sasakawa USA USJETAA grant application. We also needed time and a detailed plan. So again, if you think of a recipe, I'm going to go to the next slide. Or Casey, can you help me go to the next slide? I'm having trouble. Okay. So really anything, any big event, it doesn't matter how big it is. One way to approach it is not worry about, you know, how you're going to get there. Just start unpacking the details. Think about the who, what, why, where, when. You can do that in your application. That's a great way to start on paper. But we just started unpacking this and sort of looking at how we can approach this piece by piece. One person doesn't have to do all of it. So when you think of this as a recipe, think of it as, you know, you have your list of ingredients, and then you'll have a title. If you're on a cooking blog, you might have an annoying paragraph or 5 about why the person made this dish. You'll have different sections like the preparation, the baking time, the cooling time, you know, and then like even decorating depending on what you're making. It's sort of the same with an event. Think of it as different phases and think of your ingredients and try to be meticulous. So you're going to need volunteers if you have a big event. Think of that as one of the things that you need to plan for. So first start with the type of event. So what is your event and why are you hosting it? So we, again, had thought of different ideas like an undokai and a scavenger hunt and a gala. And I won't give all of them away because who knows if we can do them someday. But we just thought that it would be really cool to host an event at the Met, but we wanted to take it a little bit deeper than just doing a tailored tour, which you can't just sign up for. We also wanted to engage on a deeper level with the artwork and understand the significance of it and how that really affects us in a relationship with Japan. So we knew that that was sort of the vision that we had, the central vision, sort of the title of our recipe. So just like with a paper or any project, you want that vision or central thesis, and anything you plan should tie back to it. So if you're doing something for your event that doesn't go to, you know, strengthening U.S.-Japan relations or the role of art, then it might not be the best plan for this event, even though you could use it for another event. And then again, ensure you're tying this back to any grant requirements. So for us, Sasakawa and USJETAA were very generous in making this happen. Again, the Metropolitan Museum of Art is a great organization, but it's expensive to host events there. It's not something that we could do within the bounds of our GIA funding or even fundraising. We're like learning with each year and each event how to bolster our opportunities for funding. But it's a relationship and goes both ways. So we want to make sure, just like you're tying things back to the thesis, make sure you're also on the same page with your grantor about the vision. The timing of your event, just like a recipe, also really matters. So think about when you want to host the event, just like you have to think about if you're going to make a cake, when are you going to bake it? Or if you're making something in the slow cooker, you need enough time to wait for it to cook and simmer. That can be part of the equation with when you host the event. So we knew if we applied in July and we find out about funding a few months later, a few weeks later, whatever that cycle is, if we know we have a lot of details to plan and everyone has day jobs, this is volunteer, how much time do we theoretically need? We probably need more than like 2 weeks to plan it. With the type of event we're trying to host, we also know the Met is a major venue in New York, and we wanted to have a panel presentation to that engagement piece. And some of those people that we want to invite for panelists or that we were thinking of, we had to do research on them as well. We knew we had to ask them in advance because they're professors or they're museum directors and they are going to book engagements. So we needed to make sure they'd be available. So that is kind of how you can build out your timeline and deadline, just like you would a recipe with baking. So we hosted our event in January, and you think of pros and cons, so just unpack it. You know, like January, if there's a snowstorm, what's going to happen if people, you know, nobody can fly in, if people are coming from out of town or can't make it to the Met? Those are things you have to think about, but we decided to take that risk, and it worked out well. But we gave ourselves about 5 months to plan. So putting the details together, go through your list of ingredients and come up with a plan. That's sort of step one, phase one. excuse me. So we knew sort of the big pieces, like I mentioned, the speakers and the Met, that was our vision and goal. So there were a lot of little details with these events, but we knew the big pieces. In order to even make this feasible, we had to make sure that they were available up front or it wasn't going to happen and we couldn't fulfill our requirements, and we didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. So we up front, it was sort of giddy, like it was sometimes it can feel like hurry up and wait. It was giddy, but we pushed really hard in the beginning to find a time to host this. So we found the date in January. We held that. We booked a couple of main speakers. And then we started thinking about the smaller details when we knew we had a foundation to build on. So some of those details and ingredients were our team and volunteers, how many people we might need, thinking about a photographer, and we took advantage of talking to Bahia about the idea beforehand. Joy and Bahia from Sasakawa USA and USJETAA, respectively, were really supportive and working through sort of the details of the event. They had questions about the photographer and details, so that helped us as well. And then things like follow-up and press, things like, you know, that you might not think of, they seem like they're a long way off, but build that into the recipe at the end of your plan. So then check your plan. So as you go, you're going to do this with your application. It should be like a final read of your application, the who, what, where, when, why. If you can't answer those might be questions your funder has, but there are also questions your volunteers or team might have. So those are questions that we tried to be able to answer, not so formally, but essentially that's what we were doing, understanding sort of what the event was. If it's a really big event, you might want to consider, you know, having teams and pulling in planning committees. It's a really awesome opportunity for people to get involved with the planning process and see what your chapter does, sort of behind the scenes, how those events take place. In this instance, the exec team kind of planned it, but I don't think we could have done that if we hadn't done the gala the year before. We had a team in place that was really comfortable working together and had a very clear vision. But we've also done it with having, you know, different teams and then like a lead on that team, somebody doing PR, someone doing something else. I'm going to go to the next slide. So I'm just going to give you a visual of sort of what this looks like. So the who, what, where, when, why. So not the next slide, let's see, but the one after. So here you can see, these are some visuals of the event we had at the Met. So the why and where. So the first picture, there's sort of like, think of this like two sides of the screen. I'm starting in the upper left-hand side. That is a picture I took of the foyer at the Met, the day of the event. It's this grandiose big building. We toured it like just like a wedding. You can go to wedding expos and get free stuff and learn about your events if you want ideas to throw stuff. Just like seeing, you know, your venue for a wedding. We went to this venue. We looked at the different rooms. We talked about costs. We did that actually in the summer before we applied so that we knew how much to ask for in our grant application. But like, it's just sort of a striking venue coming in. So that was like the dream, the wish, the reach. So that's why we chose this. And the where, and then these are our speakers and the moderator. It's, you know, a former director of art at Japan Society, the head of the Isamu Noguchi Museum, Ambassador Yamanouchi, the Consul General in New York City. We have the curator of Asian art at the Met, the current head of art at Japan Society, and the Deputy Consul General. So that's like a pretty like crazy list for our chapter, but we were very privileged to have them come and speak and share their knowledge. And that has also created a platform for ongoing conversations. So we were looking for both an event, but then also a forum to have that rich conversation engagement. So that's where we started. So this is phase one, figuring out all of these details. And then the who, 70 people. This was a good opportunity to reach out to some of those senpai alumni, maybe people that have been officers in the past over the last 30 years. You can see the check-in table, people coming in, thinking about those details, how it flows. Because it was the Met, they set up the chairs. We weren't allowed to touch them, but you see the banners from our funding organizations and the JETAANY logo. So little details like that, those are sort of the ingredients when they say sprinkles. You know, a recipe will add those kind of details so you know what to buy. Think of those things as you're building out your event. And then you see, for example, too, the coat racks in the back, and we have a step and repeat, that thing for pictures on the left side of the screen, the bottom. Alex Varney is there with a microphone, but like the wireless mics and the coat racks, those are things that the Met had, but we had to ask and make sure, see how much they were, and then, you know, just make sure that we were planning for cushion. And then food. So with any event, something I learned when in New Zealand and saw at JETAA there, but Kai food and Maori is you know, the key to success in any event. So we had a lunch spread, but because it was at the Met, we had to use their caterers. So that's something I just want to flag, like, you need to make sure you budget, because especially in New York, things like that can be expensive. So phase 2 of the event, 1 is just sort of getting set up, getting checked in. And then you see on the left side of this, you see a guy holding, that's a volunteer, and he's holding a sign. So then we had 3 separate tour groups, and these groups each had a docent, and then they went around and looked for an hour, I think it was, hour and a half, at the Japanese areas of the Met. So you see them in the foyer looking at the pottery. You see them looking at some of the modern pieces, the scroll and the shoji. So we wanted to make sure that the groups weren't so large that people couldn't hear the speaker, but then also make sure that it was organized. People knew where to go. They knew what to do. You know, like, it was very clear when they got there, but we needed volunteers for that. So that's another ingredient. So after everyone did the tours, they came back, grabbed some food, and brought it to the seats. They could sit anywhere. And then phase 3 was this panel discussion. So we had some introductory remarks from officers at JETAANY and from our funding organizations, tying this back to the point of why we're there. So there was sort of a flow. The aim was to have a flow throughout the day with, you know, the point is, the goal, the vision for the whole event is understanding how art strengthens U.S.-Japan relationship. So hopefully people were thinking about that as they were going through looking at the art, and then we sort of tied that together for them, talking about the art, and then they had that tangible experience that they could pull from. So I'm going to go to more of phase 3. You can see we had a experienced moderator, and part of the reason we did that is that we researched questions. We spent some time working on the program, but that moderator, she is also an academic and runs an online forum. She's respected globally, has also run galleries in Japan, but it was somebody that, by having her come in, and we paid them honoraria. So I will say up front, like, we had to make sure that was in our recipe, but we knew that for us, that was a little bit easier to do. She's an expert. And so, you know, that lent to us not having to worry about that, and a seamless flow. We also had each presenter do a Jiko Shokai with their own slides, and then had volunteers who walked around with a microphone at the end. And then you can see the JETAANY, our board of advisors, and our executive team, and the Claire team at Claire, New York, sort of at the end, and it's all smiles because it was a really great day. So the last thing I'll sort of say before handing it to Dustin, and I'm trying to give you an event, but sort of pivot between what Bahia was saying and then what Dustin's going to say, that there's a structure to this. You can fit the event into Bahia's structure, and it's, again, just breaking it down, but you don't have to do this. This isn't, you're not the first one to do this. Learn from other chapters, ask us for tools, you know, ask or create your own, but ask USJETAA and all the amazing resources we have, because this is an example of one tool that I think Casey helped us with as well, but it's a run of show. And so basically with event planning, you can break everything down. This is like our recipe. So you might have weekly calls to check in, but you can see, like, we had swag bags. So everything from all bags ready, printed materials out, everything like that, from the first part to the very end of this run of show, it's down. It can be 15-minute increments even. The end of it, we had all the phone numbers. So if anything happens the day of, sort of exec members and volunteers have this run of show, so everybody knows how things are going. Group A leaves, Group B leaves, Group C leaves. This is your recipe. So using tools like that really helps. And again, like I said, we had done a gala the year before, which was sort of a test run and doing a big event. We've done them in our chapter, but they're a little bit different each event. So I think we benefited from that a lot. We also reviewed with Bahia and worked with Joy and Bahia. So I will hand it to Dustin, but happy to share these materials or answer any questions about this. This is for a very large event, but I think the lessons and especially who, what, where, when, why apply to any grant and any event.
Thank you, Brenda. It was great to see how you were able to put all those pieces together for the event and get everyone sort of working towards the same purpose. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dustin. Dustin, are you there?
Sorry, I was having problems unmuting myself. Yeah. Okay, I think I've got it now. Let's see. So I'm signed in here twice. You may have given me remote access to my phone because I'm on my laptop now and I can't change slides.
Okay. Hold on. Let me. Okay.
Try the other, Dustin.
Are you able to? Yeah. Okay.
Looks like those arrows aren't coming up. Okay. All right. So, hello. So I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and one of our big events that we have each year is the Kansas City, I realized I have a typo there, the Kansas City Japan Film Festival, not the Kansas City Japan Festival. And so each year, kind of like just piggybacking off the who, what, where, when, and why, we work with promoting this event so that JES, the public, JET alumni members, students can attend this event and learn more about Japanese film culture. We work very closely with Alamo Drafthouse, Kansas City. We typically host it during the third Sunday in February, and the reason why is that's always what's worked for us for our planning calendar with Kansas City Art Institute. And the goal for our event is to raise money for the Taylor Anderson Memorial Foundation. And we are funded strictly through MOFA and then as well as working through the Kansas City Art Institute nonprofit. So go ahead, I'll see if I can go to the next slide. I don't know if it'll let me. Yeah, still not letting me. Sorry about that. Thank you. So what to take into consideration. So I've presented about our film festival at previous national conferences before, and I've had some other chapters tell me about, we're at an actual movie theater. How much does it cost? How much does the movies cost? Do we provide food? Where did we begin? And so all of that can add up really quickly. And it also depends on the purpose of your event. Are you wanting to do a fundraiser, like how we donate money to Taylor Anderson Memorial Foundation? Or are you wanting to raise money for your own chapter, kind of like as a slush fund? And depending on the purpose of your event will kind of determine how you handle the rest of this. So for example, for budget, something to keep in mind is if you're wanting to start small, like you're wanting to start with like an easier recipe, you're going from like, let's learn how to make eggs first before we make an omelet. Let's start with a simpler budget. So to keep a lower budget, you could go with a cheaper location or possibly somewhere free. I think on my next slide is when I have all this spelled out. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, so think of like a community college auditorium, and I'm just talking about like what we started off with long time ago. We didn't have to pay for the community college auditorium. We also have used the Kansas City Art Institute has a small theater. We didn't have to pay for that. And so when the chapter approached MOFA and saying, our local consulate and saying, this is what we want to do, well, we couldn't ask for thousands and thousands of dollars up front. We had to start small. We weren't sure how this was going to turn out. So our starting off market was students. We started off 1 to 2 movies. That keeps your movie rights costs down. You'd be very surprised how much rights can cost. They can be anywhere from $50 to $500, depending on, like, if it's a Studio Ghibli movie. Every Studio Ghibli movie is about $500 for 1 day showing. your location costs. So as we grew from targeting just students at a small scale theater, we decided, okay, we need to expand. We need to try to go for something a bit more challenging. We went to an art museum here in the Nelson Atkins. They have a theater. And then eventually that started to grow. And where we were running into challenges was food. The museum didn't have food. And most people, when they go to see a movie, they want to get at least popcorn. And so we started a relationship with Alamo Drafthouse and Kansas City Art Institute. They help plan our event, and we get to use their nonprofit license to get nonprofit rates with Alamo Drafthouse and for movie rights. And so for something like this, you want to start planning very early. We start about 6 months in advance. We haven't found any benefit in starting any earlier. Starting any later, we've had poor attendance just because the ticket sales came out too late, or we weren't able to promote heavily enough in between when we finished planning everything to when the actual event was. We've had some years where, the weather was a big influence, but so that's really important to plan early in advance so you can communicate all of that to your potential attendees. And heavily use social media ads. If you've never used Facebook ads before, I highly suggest you learn how. It's really not that difficult. There's pre-made templates within Facebook. I'm not going to go into the details of Facebook ads just because their system is always changing. So what maybe I show here may not be the case in the next several months or next quarter, next year. I'm also working on making a PDF of all this as well. So don't feel like you need to quickly type in all these notes. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So step one. How do we do all this? So decide when you want to have this. Like I said, you're going to need about 6 months to prepare, and you want to make sure you're not trying to crunch this in, because if you can plan this in advance, you'll be able to have a more successful event. We have found that we've made a separate dedicated group that meets outside of our monthly member meetings. We go from starting off, we meet maybe once or twice the first month to, as it gets closer to the event, meeting more frequently. And the reason for that is because there are some things that need to be discussed in person that can be discussed more clearly and quickly in an hour conversation than several days worth of emails. And if you're wanting to reduce your costs, I highly recommend finding a nonprofit like a local art college, or maybe there's a film festival based nonprofit that would be willing to partner with you to help you keep your costs down. Once you've got all that decided, the next step is think about a budget and find a theater if that's the route you're wanting to go. Whether if you're wanting to go through MOFA or Sasakawa or GIA funding, or potentially having another outside sponsor or sponsoring it just yourself if you have the funds to do that. I want you to decide the budget. That'll determine where you can spend it, whether it's going to a full-scale theater like Alamo Drafthouse, or going with something more simpler like at a community college. That'll also determine how many movies you can show. If you're wanting to show 4 movies, you're looking at about anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 for 4 movies, depending on what movies you show. If you're showing, all 4 Studio Ghibli movies, you're looking at a lot of money. But before you get that ironed out, you want to make a huge list of movies. Just in one meeting, make a giant list of any movie that you think that the public would be interested in seeing. And the reason for that is it takes a long time for movie distributors to get back to you. You think they're really quick. Some studios will get back to you the next day. Some may take a month. And if you're planning this around the holidays, they may not get back to you till after the holidays, which could be several months. Some of our distributors took many, many months to get back to us. And you want to make sure you're building in enough time to secure those rights, because if you're showing a movie to the public and you're charging for it, you have to buy those rights. If they find out, you could potentially have some legal issues on your hands. So once you finalize your movies, you have your theater locked in, and you're ready to go, tickets are ready for sale, start promoting. Use Facebook ads, Instagram ads. You could do organic posting or paid posting. That's been the 2 social media platforms that we've had the most success with. but you want to promote very heavily, like posts every other day, lots of visuals, promote the trailers, promote the link for ticket sales, make it easy for people to attend your event, whether it's alumni, other Japan-based organizations, or the public. You don't want them to have to think. So just make it easy for them. Before everything's ready to go and you're ready to start your festival, confirm all the details with the theater. For example, like where your table is going to be to distribute the tickets, or you should have this ironed out in advance. If the theater is going to distribute tickets for you, they typically charge extra for that. And weather. This past year in Kansas City, we had a very terrible winter where it was snowing all the time. And some years we do, some years we don't. We asked Alamo, if we get 6 inches of snow and lots of ice and the roads are shut down, what's your policy? And someone had brought that to my attention because I'd never thought of that before. And they said, we don't close, which really surprised me. They said, for private events, we won't close. So those are the kinds of things, the things that may go wrong, you want to make sure you have that understanding with the theater. And then at the end, enjoy the film festival. And if you're donating to a charitable cause, make sure you promote that. And then you also spread the goodwill of JET. Okay. And I think this is my last slide. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything before we start questions.
This is Brenda. I'll just add one thing. I mean, I'd welcome questions, but I think that it's a good juxtaposition with the Met, and our goal was sort of to access the Met's collection, but we've also used different venues where we've actually traded, like we'll do 2 events. Hustling International, for example, has a landmarked cool building in New York City, and we've used that ballroom and traded them. Said we'd host 2 sessions, whatever, for your residents if we can use the ballroom. So it doesn't have to be the Met, but I think this is a really good example of like scaling and how to start. Because again, I don't know that we would have started with the Met if we hadn't done a gala and gained some confidence and practice.
I guess I'll just jump in. So it seems like there's a lot of different ways to put together things and sort of process that out. If you have questions, you can go ahead and type that into the chat box, or you can also use the raise hand function if you want to use the microphone to ask your question. So either one of those is fine. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll go ahead and kick it off with our first question. What kind of follow-up did you do after the event? Did you do any sort of debriefing or anything like that?
Before we continue, it looks like Baya is she can't unmute herself.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I don't know. It wouldn't let me unmute myself for some reason, but now I can talk. I actually just had one thing I wanted to add before we get into the question, which is just that I think Dustin's comment about partnering with an NPO, especially if you're not a 501c3 organization yourself, was a really, really important point. I know a lot of chapters, even with the Sasakawa grant, have partnered with Japan-America societies. There's also the opportunity to partner with universities and so on. And that can be a really, really rich way for you to access funding that you couldn't access otherwise, and also to keep your costs much lower than others. So I just kind of want to re-emphasize that point. Casey, can you repeat the question you had just asked?
Sorry, yeah, I was muted. So that's a great point. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and type that into the chat function or the Q&A, or you can also use the raise hand function and we'll go through those. Just to start off with the first question, I asked, what kind of follow-up did you do after your event? Was there any sort of like debriefing or anything for the event?
I can go, Justin. Justin, if you want to go first.
Okay. So for the film festival in the past, we've done just a very brief survey through either SurveyMonkey or MailChimp. We kept it pretty short and simple, like less than 5 questions, like what did you think about the movie choices? Would you come back next year? What was your rating for Alamo Draft House? And what was your rating on the price? And so to pretty much, we get, like I said, we try to keep it short and simple because it's hard to get people to respond, and the people that do respond don't want to take a long time to fill a survey. So we wanted to make sure that what we were collecting was beneficial for us. So pretty much we just do it a sliding scale, 1 through 10 for each question.
We had a really long, I feel like we had a more in-depth follow-up survey, but this was also sort of I mean, it might not be a one-off event, to be fair. We might end up doing other art events in New York City. Who knows? I think part of this was building a foundation that we can now work from, and we've seen the effects of that. But I think part of it is like immediate follow-up. We knew that people were coming into town for this event and that they were going to be at the Met, and they kind of got a ticket at the Met. It's now $25 if you don't live in New York City to go. They changed their policy this year. So we had a scavenger hunt. We tried to think of immediate things for people. And then we also had some meetings with people that were here for the event from the JET office at the embassy and things like that. So there's sort of immediate things that we thought of as sort of a byproduct of the event. And then in terms of follow-up and debrief, through the process of our grant report, we talked a lot about the event. I'd say one of the biggest things, something we did, JETAANY uses a Google-based platform, and so we have a Google Drive. And so we created a folder, and as we were working, we would save docs to that folder, and then we just made sure everything that we had been using and creating, like budget sheets, whatever, was saved to that folder, because you feel like you'll do it eventually, but it's, you know, as you move on with other events. So we saved the documents. We did a debrief as we were working through the report for our grants. We did is it called a hogwash? We did a follow-up call with Bahia and Joy.
A hot wash.
Hot wash, sorry.
Or in the theater, we call it a postmortem.
Yeah. So, oh, I can't laugh. I'm going to cough. But we did the postmortem or hot wash to sort of discuss how things went. And then I think just conversations, as I said, like a good example of follow-up, because we had done another grant the year before and a grant the year before, we sort of can work off of those. So like we use some of the gala, I just use that because it's an example from the year prior, but we use some of those tools and forms this year. So then if there was another event next year for the storytelling event we did a couple months later, we had everything together, and it gave us tools to do the next thing. We were able to build and provide some resources. Oh, and then, sorry, press. So one thing, it's also like, it's good to do stuff right away because you can forget, but we also reached out to see if there were authors and have been working with someone about writing an article still, but just writing things up, sending things in the surveys, so sending to everyone and getting photos up, because you can do this huge event, but like you should take credit for it as a chapter, and it's a good example of our community and the strength of JETs. It's really incredible that we have 70,000 alumni internationally. And so, it's something like just having it on Facebook. It's something that's exciting to share and spread the word sort of. So photos and getting those up is also follow-up.
Yeah, and I just want to add that if you are seeking grant funding for it, something that your grantors will generally be looking for is some kind of post-event write-up, sharing photos, sharing on social media, because obviously that is good for that organization, the grantor who is providing you with the funding.
Yeah, that's great. I think Brenda made a really good point about keeping like a running record of everything you're doing and all the sort of steps and things that change. So like when you do that after event debrief, it's really easy to remember everything that happened, especially when things get really busy right before the event. You might not remember everything. Another question I had was there anything that changed while the event was happening, or anything that went really wrong where you had to sort of shift things that were, shift the event, and how did you go about doing that?
Brenda, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. Yes and no. I feel like we had some small things pretty much went as planned, but I think it's because we had this really detailed plan. I mean, the ambassador, so our consul general in New York is always an ambassador level. So Ambassador Yamanouchi was late, so he didn't go on the tour. He came and he spoke and he met with people, but we had a volunteer who's pretty pita in Japanese, assigned just to meet him and greet him. So that was fine. So that could have been bad, or weather could have been bad. We had an issue with one person, and I don't feel like I should discuss it here, but just things like that. I think because we had such a detailed structure, there's flexibility to just say, okay, this isn't going, what can we do? Just customer service. You know, I don't think people always realize that it's just like, you know, your volunteers hosting an event, and so going with the flow. So that's how we dealt with sort of unforeseen issues. Otherwise, with this one, I think things went well. I mentioned the gala, the U-Haul, to bring all the stuff that we had bought for the event, like, excuse me, thousands of dollars worth of stuff. The U-Haul wasn't ready. It was 4 hours late, so we didn't get to set up until 4 hours after we had planned. And so again, I think if you have a structure and sort of a clear vision, you can come up with like a, you know, you're a team and come up with a plan to change things last minute. Like, okay, what are we going to cut? We can't put up these string lights, or, you know, this person's upset. You know, I can cover that, this area. If you go with them or have them join this group instead, someone doesn't show up. Just being able to change the schedule mid-event, where your participants don't notice, that's probably the hardest part, and I think that we did okay with that. I don't know if that's Dustin.
For Heartland, previous years we've had less of a turnout than what we've expected, and for Alamo Draft House and probably most theaters, they require a food minimum when you book one of their theaters, which means, like, for, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Alamo Draft House, you can order pretty much in the show, and we've had a few years where we didn't meet that, and we had to make sure that we had enough funding set aside and eat pretty much a good chunk of our slush fund in past years. And it was a little bit hard to swallow, but that was something that we just had to do. And so that's why the past few years, what we learned from that was we just had to make sure that we're promoting often and promoting early.
I think that the theme with this is cushion. That Dustin and we both had cushion, or like we didn't foresee some of the issue, like this issue that I was talking about, but it's sort of like if something burns, like you're making a 3-layer cake and one of them burns, like, can you make a 2-layer cake instead? You still have your recipe and you still have an outcome, and maybe people won't know.
Mm-hmm. That's a good takeaway, a good way to put it. If there are any other questions, we're sort of running down on the time here, but if anyone has any last-minute questions, you can use the Q&A or chat again. I'll go ahead and maybe ask another question, our last question, if no one else has questions. What is one way for smaller chapters or sub-chapters that may not be able to maybe do one of these big marquee events, what is something that they can do? What are some lessons or takeaways that they can do to maybe host something that's a little bit smaller? And then also, if, you know, there's a lot of turnover in JETAA chapters, you know, what is something you can do if you have an annual event or something to sort of keep some sort of continuity from year to year?
That's a good question. Because I consider Heartland one of the smaller chapters, not geographically, but member-wise. We do have, other small-scale events. I'd say if you see a niche in your town that's not being filled. Like, for example, if you guys already have a film festival that's really big, you know, maybe you can niche down and do just anime film festival and do a couple animes that might be smaller. Or if you want to get away from film festivals completely, like, for example, another smaller event we've done is at a library that was targeted towards JET families, and I think maybe our budget was maybe $100 for that event. So, I mean, I'm not going to go into details for that now, but I guess look at, okay, like, is there a group in your community, your JET community, that may not resonate with a film festival or, you know, some very large scale event? Like, you know, it's harder, you know, those really large events may be difficult for families to come to. So if you can target something for kids at a library or something, that might be more low budget and easier to plan for.
Yeah, I think you can do, I mean, like, this is a pretty formal structure, and it's just because, you know, these things, I think a film festival sounds daunting because I've never done one. So I think when you approach it, you know, you have 6 months going in. But we were inspired by hearing Dustin's story and did a film screening last year, you know, and that's something that, you know, if you are a chapter, maybe you can approach, think about, just remember you're not alone. It's just like, again, I talked about the transition with AJET, and here, like, JET is sort of like an onion. You have your school community and then your local community and your JET community and, you know, the expat community. The same thing with JETAA, you don't have to do it on your own. So like Minnesota, I saw them 2 weeks ago, and Kate was talking about how they partnered for their grant with a local organization who helped run things. And in the past, we had a Japanese American organization here planning a lot of social events for JETAANY, like things like our Yukata bar crawl. You know, so you could ask if a smaller chapter can't afford that film screening, I mentioned that, maybe there's somebody that's willing to pay for it, or an organization. Like, don't feel bad asking for things like that and help, because it could be a tax write-off for them. For all you know, it's not always a big ask, or maybe they'd be excited to get involved and it's a new partnership for your organization. Think about ways to partner. And then if with a smaller thing, again, another idea that we got from NatCon and from other chapters is this monthly meetup where you meet the same day every month at a different location around the city. That's something that doesn't take a lot of planning. You do it once, and then it's sort of a template, and you can do it every time. So start small, see what flavor fits your chapter, and then, yeah, just practice. Ask for help, ask for chapters, ask other chapters for their tools or for advice. We borrow ideas, we bring ideas, you know, that's, just don't be afraid to try, and, you know, make sure it's the right fit, that you guys are having fun.
Yeah, I would also like to add that, you know, the mark of a successful event is not necessarily size. Like, it's exciting and fantastic that you guys are doing these cool events, but as Dustin explained, you know, it took many years for them to build that event into what it is now. And it was much smaller when it started. And I mean, even an event where you have like a roundtable discussion with 2 JET alumni speakers and like 15 JETs coming there and participating in that might be a very, very successful event with fantastic content, even though it doesn't cost a lot and isn't, you know, super large, 70 people.
And and like Bahia said, this is the first time we did the JETs at the Met event specifically, but we also have people on the board like Monica, our country rep, who's been involved with JET for 14 years with JETAA. And so the way we got some of these speakers was through connections. Like Monica knows people in the community, or she, you know, we've had other events that we built on and learned from and brought those components in, and then had help with these speakers also from Bahia and USJETAA. And, you know, so it wasn't just us. But if it's not fun, like in one of the other webinars, Adam in Colorado was talking about burnout. Even with these events, you don't want to burn out. Everybody's got jobs in addition. So just take it in bite-sized pieces and make sure you're having fun.
Absolutely. And also look to the other chapters. I mean, it's great that with the NatCon that everybody gets together and we learn about all these cool programs that other chapters are doing. but I'm glad we had this opportunity to get into it in a little bit more detail from JETAANY and JETAA Heartland. But I know when I was president of Florida JETAA, we looked at the JETAANY UCATA pub crawl, and we're like, that's a great idea, and it's really easy to do. Let's do it. Well, they're still doing it in Florida, and it's been one of our more popular events because it's very easy to organize. It's a lot of fun, and so definitely look to other chapters. I know this is the last question, so I just want to take a moment to go back to the Sasakawa grant. For those of you who are listening, this year we've built a template repository that has example documents of things like the run of show and an agenda. And it also has the example, the documents that, the templates and information that were used by the chapters who received our grant last year, so that if your chapter is interested, you can go and look at that and kind of, you're not starting from scratch. The other thing I'd like to say is if you are interested in applying for the Sasakawa grant, please apply even if you feel like you don't have all the answers, like you don't have the whole plan. It's really just important to have that the initial pieces, that kind of overall vision, and we will work with you and help you workshop and provide some support so that you can make a successful event.
I think that's some excellent advice and some good pointers, and it's great to know that you have a network out there. You're not alone in planning these events or putting these together. Feel free to contact any of us if you do need ideas or help with putting together an event or funding, and we're here to help. I just want to thank everyone for joining this webinar, and thank you to our speakers, Brenda and Dustin and Bahia, for being with us today and sharing some valuable information. We have another webinar coming up on June 25th, which is for JET alumni for careers in communication and marketing. And we also have the Claire webinar on June 17th for treasurers. So you can check out both those events on our Facebook page or on our website. And you can also register for those and get notifications for when it's coming up. So stay tuned. Our recording of the entire webinar will be posted in the next week or so, and we'll be sending it out to all of you in case you want to share it or view it again, or you know someone who wants to see it. And then it'll also be available on our Facebook page and our website. Thank you again for everyone for joining us tonight, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.